So, good morning, everybody. How are you? Okay. Okay. Oh, I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for asking. Oh, I need to repeat the question. So he asked how I'm doing. I said I'm fine. Cool. So who's this guy on stage? Hi, I'm Stephan. Don't be scared by this weird letter in my last name. Probably pronounced it's Hochdörfer, but just feel free to call me Stephan. That's probably a lot easier. I'm a regular public speaker, but that's not my profession. I'm actually running my own company. The company is called bitExpert. We are located in Germany and basically building custom applications, web and mobile, for our clients. I should probably mention that we are looking for developers, so if you're up for a new challenge, just talk to me. My current role with bitExpert is called Head of Technology, which means I'm responsible for getting technology knowledge into the company, as well as helping our developers picking the right technology for our projects. And the other part of my job is the whole educational part. So we run an initiative that we call Learn and Grow, where we do a lot of trainings, tutorials, send people to conferences and stuff. So I'm managing all of that. And besides that, since I've still some spare time left, I'm not sure exactly how that happened. I'm not organizing one, but actually two PHP user groups. One is the PHP user group in Frankfurt. Hooray! Okay. Yeah. And the other one is called the PHP user group Metropolregion Rhein-Neckar, a very German name. Yeah. So that's enough German puns for this talk, hopefully. Guys, you're not here for me, you're here for this. Who of you have heard of GitLab before? Wow. Who of you is using GitLab? What are you doing in this talk? Yeah, trying to see how much I know, right? Yeah, okay, cool. So I heard yesterday that a conference talk needs to have a Wikipedia quote in it, so here we go. So Wikipedia says GitLab is a web-based Git repository manager with wiki and issue tracking features. So that's true. That's what they're doing for a long time. But this is missing a piece. And this is missing this. A year ago or 1.5 years ago, GitLab announced its Beyond CI/CD strategy, meaning that they do not only want to focus on the development part, but also on the ops part. And even more than that. So they want to give you a whole solution from feature planning, creating those features, verifying the code, packaging everything, and then transitioning to the ops part where you're just going to release the packages, you configure your build pipelines, you monitor your application on staging and production, and then again shifting over to the development part, improving existing applications, implementing new features, stuff like that. So just like covering all of that out of the box. How do you install GitLab? Very simple. There are dozens of ways. So you can use the Debian packages, you can use RPM packages, you can use the Omnibus installer, and obviously since Docker is still the new cool thing, you can also use Docker images. This is basically how we do it. Even though we don't use the official GitLab images, we've built them on our own because reasons. But for this talk, it's totally fine if you just use the default Docker image. So this is one part of the tooling that we use. We do use two other tools that I want to touch upon briefly. One is called Zonotype Nexus. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. It's basically a repository manager for a couple of different package managers. Started out as being very focused on Java, but these days they support everything from NPM, Bower. They have a Docker registry built in, and all the other stuff. We use that because when we started our journey into Docker, GitLab wasn't ready with their own implementation of a Docker registry. So these days you probably don't need this thing, but I thought I'd just highlight how we do things. So similar to Docker, we built this we put this in a Docker, similar to GitLab, we put this in a Docker container and just run it. So this basically just runs HAProxy and then this Java stuff that powers Nexus. And if you haven't seen this thing before, this is like how ugly this thing looks. What you obviously need to do, and this is true for Nexus as well as GitLab, you need to authenticate against the repository. Now in our case, we just say docker login nexus.log. We just enter our username, the password, and hopefully if everything has worked, it will say login succeeded. And you need to do this on every machine that is running then GitLab and the runners, but I'll just cover that later. So this is one of the tools that you need in addition to GitLab. The other tool, what we love to use is traefik. Who of you has heard of traefik? Okay, who likes traefik? Okay. So traefik is an HTTP reverse proxy, built, as you can guess, by the logo with Go. We love it because it's super simple to configure. First of all, you need to define your entry points. So this is like which ports are open, HTTP and HTTPS in our case. And then you configure the entry points, just pointing them to the right ports. And in case of HTTP, we simply just redirect the traffic to HTTPS. And then for the HTTPS endpoint, we define the SSL certificates. Like in this case, we just use some self-signed ones. You could also hook this up to Let's Encrypt, and then let's generate the SSL certificates on the fly. And then obviously you need to point traffic to a configuration source. To make it really easy for this talk, I just said, okay, let's just point it to the Docker daemon that is running on the local machine. So it will just monitor what's going on in Docker and create those rules that it needs internally then on the fly if anything changes in Docker. You could also hook this up to Rancher, a service orchestration tool that we use in production, and like 4 or 5 or 6 different other data sources. So very, very simple. Similar to Nexus and GitLab, we just run it as a Docker container, exposing a couple of ports, mounting the configuration, and you're good to go. Cool, so back to GitLab. This is basically the screen that you'll see if you say, okay, I want to create a new project. So just for the ones of you who have never seen this before, all you need to do is like enter a project name and you're good to go. Now I know this is a PHP conference. To really scare you, I'll show you how to set up a Magento project. I'm doing this on purpose. Just kidding. Actually, the main idea was like that I have 2 different talks, one for the Magento community and one for the regular PHP community, but it turned out it's quite a lot of maintenance to maintain like 2 different versions of the talk, plus the German and English version. So at the end, I just ditched the idea and said, okay, this is like just one version. And it makes sense because like Magento is, how do I phrase this best? Requires a bit of effort to get it installed, which then perfectly fits in the structure of this talk. So since version 2 of Magento, you can easily use Docker Composer to create a project. Just point it to repo magento.com. This is where the packages live. It will just download everything as you know, and we're good to go. Now to get this stuff up in GitLab, we add, commit, and push the files, and this is how it looks like. Done. Now at this point, just nothing happen. Like no GitLab runners, no build pipelines triggered, nothing. To be able to run the build pipelines, you need another tool, and this tool is called the GitLab Runner. So a separate tool, you can install it as a Debian package, as an RPM package, or you could use Docker as we've seen before. And the main idea is that GitLab and the GitLab CI module acts like the master that would like coordinate where the jobs run, and the real jobs are run on these runner instances. You can put that stuff on one box and have everything run there, or you're just going to scale it out on the internet, and it doesn't really matter where things run. You could also hook up such a runner into the hosted version, or into the SaaS offering of GitLab, and just going to say, okay, my runners should run locally in my office or in my data center, but I'm using like the hosted version of GitLab to host the code. So that's also possible. So you could easily play around with it before then setting up this whole system internally. To run it, again, we use Docker. We just grab the GitLab-Runner image and run it. And here we go. Now, what is happening right now is that on the one hand, we have our GitLab instance, and on the other hand, we have this runner daemon. They are not connected yet. So they live independently. They don't know of each other. To make them aware of each other, you need to register a runner instance. This is just by calling GitLab-runner register. which will then ask you a couple of questions. You need to point it to the URL of your GitLab instance. You need to provide an authentication token. So just to make sure that your runner is just connected to your GitLab instance and I'm not able to connect it to any other GitLab instance out there. So a bit of security stuff going on. You then can add a description, just name this thing so you have an idea of what this thing is doing. You can define tags, and I'll cover this later in this talk, why this is useful. You can define if the runner should be able to run builds that are not tagged, or if they should only run builds that are tagged with the expected tags. You can log a runner to one specific project in your GitLab instance. So you can say, okay, I'll just build anything that's coming up. And then this is the important part. You need to define a so-called executor. You can say, okay, run everything inside a Docker image, so spawning a new Docker instance, and then just run the commands there. You could use the shell executor, which would run that stuff on the host as the GitLab Runner user. You can use like Docker machine and SSH and all sorts of combinations to do whatever you like. So there are a couple of ways how these commands can be run. And last but not least, you need to define a default Docker image. So if you haven't defined one in your project configuration, this would be then the default one to use. Now, if you've done that, you just need to wait like a minute or two, and then those two instances will connect, and you can see this runner instance within GitLab. What this also does is it creates a configuration file in this GitLab Runner container, which looks a bit like this. Usually you don't need to edit this. What we love to do is we add these volumes. Like in this case, we expose the .composer file from the host into the container so that whenever a new build is running, Composer doesn't need to download like all the packages over and over again. So we kind of like caching that on the host. This is kind of a similar behavior that we've done in the past with Vagrant and VirtualBox. And we just like copy that for making the builds run faster. You could also then link your NPM packages and maybe also the Debian repository files that will be downloaded there as well. So just to speed up things. Now, as I said in the beginning, when you run Composer install for this Magento thing, you need to point it to the repo.magento repository. You need to authenticate yourself against it. Of course, I could hard code the access credentials in my configuration file for this project, but that's kind of like, yeah, not really sure if I want to do that. And this is basically the solution for it. So you can manage your secrets within GitLab on a project level or on a group level. So if you have like multiple Magento projects grouped in one group within GitLab, you can use like a global definition, so to speak. All you need to do is open the project settings, manage or navigate to the pipeline settings, and then in the secrets variable section, just define all the variables that you want to use. Just like key value, that's it. And then they're exposed in your builds. But still, how do we get these jobs running? And this is super simple. All you need to do is add a .gitlab-ci.yml file in the root of your project, and you're good to go. Those of you who are familiar with Travis, this is pretty similar, although the syntax is a bit different. So what we do here in the first place, we say, okay, please do use the PHP-7i CLI image as a base image for all the different tests that should be run. And then we define a test job. The test job runs in the test stage. You'll see later what that means. And it's tagged with the tag Docker. So what this does is that this test job will only run on a runner that is also providing this Docker tag. So with this, I can steer a bit like where the jobs should be run. Right? It doesn't make sense to run these commands on a runner that's doing shell builds because I'm not root, I can't install stuff. So I really specifically want to let that stuff happen on one of the runners that is able to run Docker builds. And then in the script section, just going to list all the different commands that you need to. Like in this case, I just install a bunch of Debian packages and configure a bunch of PHP modules that are not part of the default CL image but are needed by Magento to be run. We also need composers. I just copied like the 4 lines that can find the composer manual. So to download the latest version and put it in user code bin. And then, as I said, once we connect to repo.magento.com, we need the authentication part. So we just use Magento user and Magento pass, the variables that we've just defined. And last but not least, we can run composer install. That's it. Now the cool thing is, once we committed, added, and pushed that file, it just ends up in GitLab, obviously. What's also happening is that this blue icon appears over here. And this means the build is running. So I don't need to configure anything. Just like add the file, push it, and the whole magic happens. What's happening? Just have a look. Clicking on it, we can see the build pipelines that are configured and that are running. Like in this case, like the first run. If we click on that, we can see the details. And this is where you can see like test with the uppercase T is the stage that we configured. And test with the lowercase t and this blue icon up front is the test job. So again, it's running, which is good. If we click on the test job, we can see the details. This is also pretty similar to Travis. You can see like all the output that's getting generated by your tools. And hopefully, fingers crossed, at the end you see something like this. Job succeeded. And you know it. Yeah, everything's working. Cool. Now, as I said in the beginning, Magento is interesting. Needs a bunch of stuff. So, I mean, just downloading composer packages doesn't prove anything, right? We want to run tests, unit tests, maybe integration tests. And to do that, since Magento is a mature application, we need a database. We could potentially say in the script section, like Docker, pull whatever image that is needed, but we can also use GitLab to do that. And this feature is called GitLab services. So I can just define a list of Docker images that should be run or downloaded up front before our jobs actually start. Now, the cool thing about this is that GitLab does a bit of magic in the background. So it first checks like which ports are exposed from these containers, and then it will also start a special container that will wait for these ports to be accessible. So in the best case, your job runs and it's known that it's able to connect to these ports. Potentially, it can, running those containers can fail, but that doesn't make the test fail. So technically, your jobs could potentially run also without accessing the database. How does that look in the configuration file? Again, we have our image section. We can define variables. Those are then passed to our own job, as well as to all the different services that we just defined. Then again, we define our test section as we've seen before. And then we add a services section where we're just going to list all the services that should be downloaded. Well, these are just like the identifiers from Docker Hub that you can use, including the version constraints. And that's all you need to do. Now, if you have a look at the output of the job, you can see like right in the middle, it says starting service MySQL 5.6, pulling Docker image. So you can see that it's downloading all that stuff and starting. Before then, your job is actually running. So that's cool. So we can run all the tests that we need, and we can be sure that this thing is working. But like, how do we get this stuff then on staging or on production? And this is what the build pipelines are for. So basically, I can define a lot of different jobs that do a lot of different things, and they are connected. Let's see how that works out. Again, we have a bit of like a shared configuration. We define our image, the variables as we've seen before. Then we define a section where we just define all the different stages that we have. To make it really easy for this talk, we just have a test, build, and deploy stage. Pretty common. If we would have commands that should be run before every job, each and every job, we can put them in this before script section. This doesn't really make sense in this specific case because Once we deploy that stuff, we just want to download a Docker image and run it. So it doesn't make any sense to install Composer and install all the dependencies on that host. So for this specific setup, it doesn't make sense, but maybe you have just something in mind that you can make use of the before script. And then we define our test and build stages. The test stage we've seen before. The build stage, pretty similar. I'll show you in a second what's going on in there. And then we define our deploy staging job. So this is really important. I see I got a typo in there. Just assume that the deploy-stage text is put where the Docker tag is. I just made that mistake. So basic idea is I want the stage deployment happen on a certain part in my data center where just those runners are, because like I pointed my staging domains to this part of the data center, to these servers. Right? And I just say, I don't want to then deploy them where the unit tests run on this part, because like the domain doesn't point there. I can't access it. So I just want to make sure that it's deployed on the right location. We also say, hey, for the deployment part, we don't need any git checkout at all, right? I just want to download the Docker container. I don't need like the full git clone of the repo. That doesn't make sense. And then we define our staging environment. We give it a name and we give it a URL. Now the cool thing is that you and your project managers, you don't need to remember that URL, right? So within the GitLab UI, there are a couple of buttons that you just can press, and it will open this URL for you. So that's good. No need to remember anything, just pressing buttons. And then we say, please run this job only for changes that are affected on the master branch. If any developer would create a custom branch for his work, those are not affected. So just for commits for the master branch. Now again, we push that stuff. Again, we have the blue icon over here telling us, hey, the build is running. And this looks a bit more complex than the previous one. Right, so we got the 3 stages, test, build, and deploy, and the 3 jobs, test, build, and deploy staging. So test is running, we've seen that. Hopefully it's gotten green, which will then kick off the build job, which looks like this. Let's say we have installed all the Composer packages and make sure that everything is run. So we're just going to tar everything, tar the whole application, move that tarred file back in the project folder. This is the CI project dir variable. And then we run the Docker build and passing that tar gzipped file as a build argument. And then Docker will take this tar gzipped file and then extract it during the Docker run. That way I don't need to maintain like 2 Docker files, one where I'm just going to add those files and one where I just link it. I don't really like this solution right now, but it feels like it's the best one that I could come up with without maintaining like a bunch of Docker files and making sure that they're all in sync. Once I've done that, I tag the image. And I use this CI commit ref slug variable all over the place. Now this is an identifier of the current branch. So I tag this one with the name of the current branch. Like in our case, it's master. Just to make sure that if I would use different branches, I'm not overriding like the different versions. That would be not the best idea. And then we're just going to push this stuff to our Nexus instance, calling docker push, and we're good to go. And this is then how it looks in Nexus. So my app with version master just appeared. Cool, so I can use it then to deploy that stuff. So build job's also green, cool. And that will then kick off the deploy staging job. So what's happening there? First of all, we pull the latest version of that image. Again, we are using the CI commit ref slug variable so that we are just referring to the exact same version that we just built before. We then stop existing containers, the MySQL one and the application one. We do remove them. And then again, we run the MySQL server instance, and then we run the application. And you can see that we've defined some labels here traefik.enable, traefik.frontend.rule, traffic protocol. So these are the information for Traefik to like generate like all the internal rules to make sure that stage myapp.log will then just point to the right container. And if we made no mistake and everything worked, this is how our staging system looks. Woohoo! Okay. I see, you're not so easy to impress. No worries, I can handle that. Right, so similar fashion for the production build. Again, I made the bloody mistake of switching stage and tags, so just assume that the tag is actually docker-prod. I'll correct that later when I upload the slides. Similar thing, we just don't want to git check out on production, we just want to run the container. We define a production environment, just pointed to the correct URL. We say this should only affect commits that are put in master. And very important, we just say when manual, which basically means that that job should only run when I manually press a button in the UI. Right? I want to check first on staging what's happening, and after that I want to say, okay, I approve, let's go live. So how does the build pipeline look now? You can see we have two jobs in the deploy stage. So again, test is running, the build is running, deploy staging was running, and everything was deployed there. And then the build pipeline just gonna stop, nothing happens. But you could also see that on the right-hand side of the deployed prod job, there is such a play button. And obviously, if it looks like a play button, it is a play button, so I can press it, which then will trigger the deployed prod job. Right. So again, I can click on that, see all the details, what's happening, and GitLab is so clever to also inform me, hey, this is creating a deployment to production. So if I made a mistake and pressed the wrong button, so this is like the moment I can click the cancel button. So that's a good trigger. And again, wait a couple of minutes, and this will hopefully appear then on production. Woohoo! Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, a bit more enthusiasm would be nice. Hang on, we are not there. So the thing is, cool, we got this pipeline working, but there is a problem, right? So we got multiple developers making changes regularly, which would then update staging regularly, which makes it really hard to test. Like if Stephan would create a patch and check the staging system, then Andreas would do the check-in, and then the Docker container would shut down, and the Andreas version would come up, and then Stephan would be like kind of mad because that doesn't work anymore. So we need a solution for that. And the solution is called review apps. And basically this means that those environments that you've just seen, like the staging one and the production one, can be created dynamically. So for each and every branch that is available in our system or in our repository. And this is what we do. So again, we define another job, deploy review, similar to the definition before. And the slide changes here in the environment section. So we name it review-ci commit rev name, and we use the CI environment slug variable for the URL. So the CI environment slug variable is just like a URL-friendly representation of the branch name, plus some extra stuff. So all I need to do is making sure that all subdomains of stage myapp.log just going to point to these review servers running those instances. We also say on stop, call the stop review job, which would then be responsible for like shutting down the Docker containers. Otherwise, they just would keep piling up, and that's probably also not the best idea. We also say, hey, just run this job only for branches, but don't run it for master. Like master is like the job or the branch that will deploy to staging and production. Anything else is like a review playground, so to speak. The stop review app, stop review job looks exactly the same. We only have to define when manual again, which is kind of weird because it gets triggered automatically, but that's a different story. And in the environment, we're just going to use the exact same name as for the start or for the deploy review job, and set the action to stop. So just making GitLab aware that this job was killed. Now, how do we test it? Well, pretty easy. We'll just create a new branch. We call it feature force login. Install a custom module that we've built, adding, committing, and pushing the files, which will then make GitLab scream to you, merge request, merge request, merge request. Okay. Merge request, exactly. So we hit this blue button saying, okay, we create a merge request. Give it a good title, give it a good description, like none. No, you don't. This is just for demonstration purposes. And then the build pipeline kicks off. Again, we got the test stage, we got the build stage, and then we got the deploy review app stage. And after the review app is deployed, GitLab will tell you. How awesome is that? Hey, I deployed review feature force login to this URL. And guess what? You can click this URL. It will open a browser. You can test the stuff and complete in isolation. So Stephan can test, Andreas can test, all of you can test. Perfect. Like in this case, it's just like showing showing the customer login as the first page when you access Magento. Cool. But now, how do we get that on staging and production? Well, it's super easy. You see this little merge button there? Just press it. That's all you need to do. It's very easy to remember. If you've done that, it will create a new commit in the master branch, or like merging that stuff in master, which then, you guessed it, will kick off another build pipeline. So again, test will run, the build will run, we deploy it to staging, maybe some project manager does a sign-off, or maybe even the customer does. And when you got the sign-off, you're just going to press the play button for the deploy prod task, and this stuff ends up on production. Cool. So that is really easy. Now, the really cool thing about this whole thing is that GitLab does keep track of the different environments that you've defined. You can see each and every running environment, including like the latest commit and who committed it. So you get a nice history of what's or which environment is in which state. And even better than that, if you click on one of those environments, like in this one, the staging one, you can see like all the versions that have been deployed there. So you can like then again have a look at what was going on, maybe when the build broke, stuff like that. So you can get a clear overview of what's happening. The only thing I really miss in this case is like an overview of like which tickets or which issues have been closed. So this is like the only version that I really miss. That would be really cool, just to keep track of what's happening. And that's basically the end of story. So this is basically how you get this thing up in production and up and running. Technically, you can do a lot more stuff, but like with 45 minutes, it's really hard to cover that all. But yeah, give it a try, play around with it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. As I said, I'll be here the whole day. Thank you very much. Since we've got about like 10 minutes left, or maybe like 5 if you want to rush to the lunch. Any questions? Yes?
I have a question about the Docker reg to actually explode.
Yeah, so the question was, do we do a cleanup for the images in the Docker registry? Yes, we do. This is basically not really built in this Nexus thing. Well, technically it is, but you need to make some magic. But we got something in the background that would then regularly clean old versions, yes.
Automated.
Yes. Well, not like every day, but like in defined intervals. Different intervals for like release versions and then the different branches and stuff. So we try to keep track of that. Yeah, not easy, but doable. Yes. Yes, so the question is, can jobs be run in parallel? And yes, this is possible. So, well, you just define them like in the same stage, and then they will just run in parallel, if I'm not mistaken. So that's definitely possible. Yes. Let's go back a bit.
It was a bit confusing, but you didn't stop for too long. And
yeah, I might be confusing, but that's a different story. So where was that? Wait. Hang on, we get there. So, well, so the question is, how does that tagging work? So we tag Well, we tag the latest version with the Nexus log my apps CI commit refs log. So this is like the matching tag. So we tag the latest build with the same tag, and we push it. Okay, I should have made that clearer. Yes.
How are the host names created for the different staging environments?
So how are the host names created for different staging environments? Technically, they aren't. So I just say, just point. Was that me waving? So, magic. Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah. Magic. Exactly. So what you do is you say like you point in your DNS server like every subdomain beneath staging myapp.log to this group of staging servers, and then you can like use any host name that you want, and like DNS magic will happen. I have no idea how, but you'll end up there. That's the best explanation I can have for you. So that's, yeah. It should be created automatically because like, if you need to ask your system administrator to do that stuff, then this whole thing will not work. Right. Yes?
Does it play well with deploying to Kubernetes? Does it provide built-in integrations and things like that?
Yes, so the question was, when you want to deploy this with Kubernetes, how does GitLab integrate? So GitLab has a quite tight coupling to Kubernetes. We haven't used it ourselves because time. That's probably the best explanation I have or excuse I have. I really want to test this because it's really tightly integrated, so you can like get all the metrics and stuff, and it does like all the magic. So that should be really easy. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah. So the question is, can we link different pipelines in different projects? I don't think so. Well, I haven't tested it, but I don't think so. I feel like it's like separate, or it's like yeah, just focused on one project. Okay, good point. You can trigger other pipelines. Okay, so not directly linked, but kind of. Cool. Anyone else? Yes. Right. So the question is, can we spawn runners as we need them? Yes, you can if you use the Docker machine stuff, because they monitor like you say the minimum amount of runners should be like 1 or 2, and then if you need more, they would actually then spawn other instances. I'm not sure if or how this would work with Kubernetes, but I could think that you could somehow tie this into that thing. But this is what I recently learned. Yes, sorry, just got some whatever. I guess this was the international sign for, hey, there's lunch in 4 minutes. Cool. Anyone else? Well then, enjoy lunch and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you for listening.